What's up, meta nerds? This video will pull from all material from canon and legends to do a complete breakdown of one of the greatest vehicles ever produced in the galaxy far, far away. This is one of the first vehicles to enter production with the purchase of a clone army by its mysterious benefactors, with the Kaminoans using the prestigious and ancient shipwright Kuat drive yards to provide all the ships and vehicles. Kuat had been a staple of the Old Republic thousands of years earlier, and with the roughly 10 centuries between the destruction of the Sith and dissolving of the Republic military via the Ruusan reformations, the shipwright was eager to earn the kind of credits you only see during a galaxy-spanning war. Kuat had many subsidiary companies that each had their own specializations, and Rothana Heavy Engineering would be charged with crafting most of the land vehicles, like the ATTE, SPHA, but also the LAAT and Acclimator, which is the first look at what we'll see were countless brilliant decisions that start all the way at the top with good leadership and project management, not as exciting as weapon engineering, but crucial to making sure that this army would work at such a large scale. By having Rothana build the Acclimator, LAAT, and ATTE, all these designers could work with each other, planning around each other's needs, and had shared supply lines. With the Acclimator having its power systems and crew right down the middle, this main area on the sides are dedicated to the racks and conveyor belt systems full of gunships, and had the tanks packing the nose and lining the perimeter, produced as units to make sure that each Acclimator that left Rothana was fully loaded. And there was a seamless transition, having that insanely fast 0.5 hyperdrive, scrambling across the galaxy, rapidly deploying LAAT infantry and LAAT carrier variants, with the spacefaring and decently fast gunship having enough power to be a flying tank on its own, escorting the LAATC with its ATTE, dropping it off in a matter of seconds with a quick release of the rounded mount on the middle legs, and it hit the ground running. Also keep in mind this holy vehicle trinity were each the main troop transports, with the Acclimator carrying 1,600 troops, more than twice the Venator, and the LAAT and ATTE being the respective air and ground ways to move clones around the battlefront. And to go one step further, they could even pack in 2 ATRTs for scouting ahead or setting up ambushes. The official mission directive for this Republic Walker was to act as a multi-purpose assault vehicle, capable of carrying out everything from the movement of clone platoons across any terrain, even when under heavy enemy fire, and also have the firepower to destroy the enemy's position once it arrived. The shape of the Walker is based on the Arctic horny whelmer, a hardy animal native to the planet Rothana. Like a 6-legged armadillo with 2 separate armored sections and a tough cartilage part in the middle, they had based other vehicles on this in the past, like a very successful old patrol vehicle they made for a mining company, and so the ATTE's design is able to navigate terrain so well because its proportions and body were shaped on a creature that could scale the icy and rocky mountainous terrain, which is why there is this flexible concertina section at the middle of the Walker. At a height of 5.7 meters, a length of 13.2 meters, and 5.32 meters across, it was about 1/4 the height of the AT-AT, 3 Jawas longer than an AAT, and wider than the fattest huts. With its top speed of 60 kilometers per hour or 37 miles per hour, it was stomping along just faster than its hovering SEPI rival, but the TX-130 was 5 times as fast. Though the whole point of not using repulsor generators like most craft, and being a mechanically powered walker, it could walk through enemy shields, something impossible for craft utilizing electrogravitic fields to float. The ATTE was also impervious to normal ion attacks due to a robust electromagnetic shielding layered into the armor, and that it was grounded through the feet. Some other important stats before we head under the armor plating is that it had a 40-ton cargo capacity, fuel for 500 kilometers or 310 miles, rations and air supply for 3 weeks, which meant that it could act as a mobile space fort dropped down on asteroids, moons, or harsh planets. But let's start by looking at the feet, or foot pads. They were packed full of terrain sensors and tractor field generators, a tech usually seen in Star Destroyers in the form of a tractor beam projector used to capture smaller ships. But they scaled this tech down to fit into the footpad so that each step had the effect of bonding to the surface. This is why it can scale 90-degree sheer cliff walls, and this ability was designed to be able to walk up fortress walls. And it's crazy that we don't have an example of this, but it said it was designed to also provide a unique angle of attack, climbing into massive cave systems or underworlds of ecumenopolises like Coruscant, so that they could hang upside down from the ceiling like a spider and rain down fire from above. Or as Skywalker showed, it could easily climb over enemy capital ships just using a magnetic feature, which was also put into these feet. So you see, Rothana took that directive literally. This thing could go anywhere, being completely sealed off with a pressurized interior, that 3-week supply of oxygen, which even if you were in a Type 1 atmosphere, it would still help with everything from dust, smoke, fire, and of course be necessary in outer space, when underwater, or in toxic atmospheres. And later in the war against bioweapon attacks, which the CIS did deploy a few times. It required 7 specially trained crew members, like pilots and CCs or clone commanders. These specialized tanker clones were trained for this role since birth. The pilot worked the 6 legs, while the spotter sat above him and worked the sensor suite station to scan through different data displays providing intel on friendly and enemy activity, atmospheric conditions, and different wavelengths of light. The spotter would then relay the info to the 4 gunners tucked in each corner, with the front 2 working the pair of anti-personnel laser cannons, while the ones towards the rear worked a single cannon, making for 6 in total. The final crew member had the best job but the lowest lifespan, sitting exposed behind the controls of the mass driver cannon up top. He got here via this simple ladder, opening this hatch and slipping in. While there was an effort to provide some armor protection, being enveloped on the sides, back, and even this headrest wrapping around to try and save his head, he would still be exposed to shrapnel and explosives that might not punch through the armor plating, but would easily blow through his plastoid body armor. Each of these sections would hold 10 troops, for 20 total, with their blasters standing up on these racks located here. Under the floor is where you find the ammo storage for the main cannon, which the troops had to manually reload onto this ammunition belt to be fed into the cannon. These could be any combination of munitions, from burrowing bunker busters, heat-seeking projectiles, sonic charges, or your standard high-explosive shells. And what would become very common was a sort of plasma bolt generating round that made it work like a standard laser cannon. A shell that helps to think of it more like a magazine, being packed full of a certain number of shots that are activated with each trigger pull, and then ejected when you went through all these shots. This combo allowed it to work like a mobile artillery vehicle, and the targeting system was accurate enough to calculate for these different rounds, and even shoot down slow-moving aircraft or intercept incoming rocket fire. A really unique design feature are the acceleration compensators packed into each of the troop sections. Usually only seen in starfighters, this tech was another form of gravity manipulation like seen in the feet, but in this case it's for reducing the G-forces felt by the troops. This is required in starfighters and capital ships, which could kill a person with their acceleration, the person normally surviving about 5 Gs, while the Executor class had a top acceleration of 1000 Gs. The compensators in the Walker were likely far less powerful than on a capital ship, but worked as a way of reducing recoil when hit by a massive round, or when falling off a surface and smashing into the ground. It's not the role this tech was invented for, but it had the effect of preventing a deadly whipping of the neck or flying out of your seat and being crushed to death by the reduction of that felt acceleration. The canopy cockpit up front opens via this hinge, and the way you get up is that this bar would pivot down to act like a stepladder. These notches are for holding clamps inside of the capital ship hangar. You can see the actuator pistons here. There are 4 exits, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear, for the troops to spill out and not just have one ramp for the enemy to focus all their fire on. And if we look close, we can see the life support air reprocessor here. We also get the comment that clones complain that they did not have specialized armor that was more streamlined and smaller for operating in these tight positions. You'd imagine they were taking that helmet off as soon as they were away from a stuck-up clone commander, but the whole suit was said to be cumbersome and just felt silly to wear your little blaster-proof armor while within one of the best armored vehicles in the galaxy. There were variants with a main loading ramp that could move supplies, ATRTs, or speeders, and some were built out to act as a mobile command center, establishing a network with that synergistic trio, the acclimator being the HQ for the Republic forces, talking to the forward command dropped off via LAATC, which in turn coordinated with the mobile command centers inside of various walkers during a large-scale offensive. This trio of Rthana craft were some of the first ships and vehicles ready for use, and they made sure that every iteration from prototypes to the final product were being shipped to Kamino to use in their sprawling training centers, which utilized everything from adjustable terrain features, holographic projectors, droid enemies, and weather simulators to prep the clones for any planet in the galaxy. These were large enough to accommodate battalions and multiple armored units, working in conjunction with the UT-AT, SPHA, Juggernaut, and various speeders. When the clones say, "Just like the simulation," sometimes they mean the video game style, but also these massive multi-day war games. In 22 BBY, Grandmaster Yoda arrived on Kamino and ordered the immediate scrambling of a sizable portion of the army that he had only learned about a few days earlier. And though it was their first time seeing real combat, all the pieces were moving with deadly efficiency. Most of the droid units seen during the Battle of Geonosis were completely legal. In fact, they had been used to enforce trade deals, protect Trade Federation assets, or by the Mune bankers in seizing property from someone that fell back on their payments, or just taxes. And with all that experience killing poor people and pirates, the banking clan's Hailfire droid was a seasoned vet, and knew how to exploit a weak spot. One of the simplest and effective vehicles in the galaxy, it just connected 30 powerful rockets to a droid brain solely dedicated to seek and destroy, drop it on fast all-terrain wheels, and we see that the first ATTE tank commanders were meeting a shockingly fast and fiery end, with rockets blowing through the legs with so much power that the tanker's underside slammed into the rocky ground, igniting the fuel reserves that line this bottom layer. Everything from the fuel for the engines and all that fancy gravitation tech, not to mention the Tabana gas used to power those 6 anti-personnel cannons, was all stored in this belly, and then chain reaction explosions would set off the mass driver shells, which were packed under the floorboards. Others showed off that droid brain by having the rockets rain down and hit it on its weakest part, the flexible connecting middle, or punching right through the ball turret to successfully exploit the line of Tabana gas and energizers that would be in this weapon. Of course, every walker that landed a hit on them was an instant kill, but the slower rate of fire had it looking like the tank battalion would be overwhelmed, until the gunship swooped in and took advantage of the droid's lack of shielding or armor, easily slicing through to cut off the advance. Once the walkers were in position, that terrain was solidly in Republic hands. Coordinating with the Acclimator and those forward stations, they were able to count the first Battle of the Clone Wars as a decisive Republic victory. A celebration of the saviors of the Republic was held in the form of a military parade on Coruscant, a show of strength for both Republic citizens and a threat to shakily allied senators, while only the most attuned masters could sense that this could also be a threat to democracy and the Jedi Order. When Palpatine first laid eyes on this army, of the ATTE walkers specifically, he said, quote, "These weapons of war would be awe-inspiring if they were not so terrifying." Almost immediately after this, these walkers would be crucial in the defense of Christophsis, though again we see that many were lost. As this battle drew on, the clone Slick would reveal that he had joined forces against his brothers, convinced by Asajj Ventress that the clones were nothing more than slaves fighting for corrupt Coruscanti elites. When he was cornered by Rex and Cody, he fled through the ammo depot, and was able to detonate explosives set on several walkers and gunships. On a battlefront where even the slightest advantage could decide the victor, the next days would see even more walkers lost, though clever thinking by the Jedi would force the Separatist surrender, and they were quickly reinforced by more troops and armored units. The assault on Teth would be one of the most stunning uses of these walkers, with the monastery being in a perfect defensive position, anti-aircraft batteries crowning the top of an enormous plateau, so the Republic had to rely on the gravity-locking footpads to make the long 90-degree ascent, with Ahsoka Tano using her saber to keep the pilots safe from incoming fire, and making it to the top just in time to save her brazen master. But they needed to immediately switch to defense. After just destroying all the anti-aircraft weaponry to take the monastery, now the Seppies were descending with multiple C-9979 landing craft, intent on making this ancient holy site their grave. As the B-1s and Spiders start to make it into the main courtyard, we see the mass driver cannon firing rapidly like a laser cannon. Not as powerful as shells, but this higher rate was why that variable munition option was so great. And we see that while the front canopy windows are immune to small arms fire, the heavy blaster cannon of the Dwarf Spider explodes through and kills these 2 clones. After faking a surrender to buy them some time and drop the droid's defenses, Rex and his boys are able to hold them off by hiding beneath this downed behemoth, until Cody's forces are able to come to their rescue. Sometime after this, droid units started calling these 6 legs and 6s. It might not be 8-legged, but instead of dreaming of electric sheep, these B-1s were having nightmares of 6-leggers as horror stories were shared between battalions. Which is a really interesting insight into the droids' minds, in that even though they weren't organics, there was still some element of psychological warfare. The next major use was during the Battle of Ryloth, where we again see some very smart tactics from the Separatists. Mace Windu and the 91st Mobile Recon Corps were leading an armor division through a narrow canyon pass on their way to liberate the capital city of Lesu. AATs waited to open fire until all the walkers were far along the path, and then took down the lead walker, bringing them to a halt, and then worked to close the rear.
Now order our cannon to target their rear units. We'll box them in and blast them to pieces.
Mace ordered his recon troops to deploy the ATRTs, then used his powers in the Force to break the canopy glass and free the unconscious pilot. Was probably very glad he was wearing his full armor that day, before calling deep on the Force to push the massive walker out of the path and free up the rest of his units. Expert use of frog walkers outmaneuvered the AATs and cleared the way for the tanks to push towards the capital city, where Wat Tambor and his tactical droid were examining the weaknesses of this infamous Sixer that would soon be shelling their defenses. With the help of local resistance fighter Cham Syndulla, the 91st boys approached the city to make sure it was free of droids and provide rations for the Twi'leks, only to witness the latest of CIS war crimes, as hyenas slaughtered the civilians before they could even think of joining Syndulla's resistance. By now, stories had spread of ATTE battalions leveling whole mountains to get to the target, so the T-Series calculated that their best option was to use the captive Twi'leks as living shields, putting their encampments all around the walls. The combined 91st and local forces launched their attacks as MTTs were returning to the capital, hoping to cross the energy bridge in time, only for the droids to show how willing they were to sacrifice each other.
Oh well, too bad for them.
But the 2 troops and Mace were able to reactivate the bridge, and the RTs and Blurgs storm over and fight their way into the city. with Mace taking Wat Tambor hostage, and when the walkers were finally within the walls, all could celebrate this hard-fought win, with the ATTEs playing a part in the victory parade. Though we do not see this, there are several reports of how this walker was susceptible to mines. He got 6 legs to step on a mine, each walking pretty close to the other, and it wasn't that far off the ground, so worse than losing the foot, the mines usually penetrated that belly full of fuel, with similar effects to what we saw with the Hailfire missiles. The ATHE was an evolutionary link between the Republic and Imperial walkers, having longer legs than the TE, but not as long as the AT-AT. For whatever reason, there are no images of this vehicle, but I believe this has to do with the fact that Kuat and Rathona had some insider intel. A certain embodiment of the dark side may have told them to focus on building a towering fortress and to not worry about the next iteration of wartime tank, because it is said that they began work on the AT-AT before the AT-HE was even finished. After Cad Bane captured the holocron and kyber crystal required to locate all known Force-sensitive children, Anakin would deploy these walkers in another novel way.
You are not thinking of using those to transport the clones to that frigate.
Well, they are pressurized.
And they're equipped with magnetic feet. Good call.
As the walkers were released, they gently floated down to make contact, and we see that they are using the rapid-fire laser charges during this rescue mission of Master Opal, not wanting to blow up the ship with explosive shells. These walkers would go down with the enemy ship, but the mission was mostly a success. Ki-Adi-Mundi and Kenobi would lead one of the largest defensives of the entire war, during the Second Battle of Geonosis.
Once we have landed, we shall knock out the shield generator. That is our primary target.
Y-Wing bombers would first try to take out the gun emplacements near the LZ, but Geonosian cannons were still operational and firing away on the LAATs racing through the flak, along with growing numbers of Nantek starfighters.
Get the tanks on the ground, now!
Mundi's forces were shot down short of the LZ, and Kenobi's were shot down as well, but crash landed a bit closer, while Skywalker was in position but lost all of his ATTEs.
Skywalker's tanks are gone, and they're trying to contact General Kenobi's forces for support.
Falling back on one of the oldest and most successful tactics, they circled the wagons, or walkers and gunships, to create an impromptu armored base to try and hold off the bugs swarming with sonic blasters, speeders, and AATs, while also trying to coordinate with Yularen and Atmosphere to locate the downed generals. As the clones fought through the chaos, they find the only survivor of this 212th group were Kenobi and a single clone. Mundi used his saber to cut through some of the anti-tank barricades and made it near Skywalker's position, as the lead Venator was now being strafed by the Nantex fighters. Skywalker was able to bring down that defensive wall blocking their path to the shield generator, and the flame troopers were clearing out the tunnels. From this vantage point, Kai could see that the LZ was about to be overwhelmed, and is able to call in air support just in time.
The reinforcements have arrived!
By now, most of the walkers had been disabled, but Kenobi believed there was still enough to pull off the victory.
You'll be able to temporarily jam their scanners so they are unable to target the incoming tanks. Once the tanks knock out the shield, Master Mundi can bring the rest of the troops in with the gunships.
This is one of the best examples of that genius decision by Rathona to make a tank without repulsor tech. The ATTEs were able to walk through the shields and open fire on the generator with their high explosive shells, and the gunships perfectly coordinated to swoop in just as the protective plasma layer fell apart. The next target was the main droid and weapons factory. Luminara and Dooley's forces were coming in with fresh gunships, tanks, and hundreds of troops. As they pushed through, it was looking like an easy victory, but the first bad sign was the ambush launch from the tall, rocky spires. And while the tanks were encircling the fortress and defending the clones from enemy infantry, for the role of actually punching through the thick fortress walls, that task went to a row of AV-7 cannons. But then a new model of Bactoid tank emerged through the thick plate doors. The simply named Super Tank would unleash a barrage of mortar fire that was unrelenting for several minutes, easily destroying the unarmored cannons, and just through accuracy by volume, were able to land devastating hits on the weak spots of the ATTEs. While the armor of the Super Tank was impenetrable to even the mass driver cannon, having no weak spots on any forward-facing section, perhaps only near the launchers themselves, which is why we see it has an armored hood that only peels back when firing. Ahsoka and Barriss Offee used this weapon to hit the main generator and bring down the entire factory, surviving by being inside of this indestructible new tank. In Felucia, we got to see the walker being used in the role of long-range artillery, and quickly switching into an armored troop carrier role to take a CIS fortress. And after years as a beloved workhorse of the Jedi Generals, its most famous use would be to try and kill Kenobi, when Cody executed Order 66 and immediately moved to kill the traitorous general. Though it wasn't a high explosive shell, it also wasn't one of those smaller anti-personnel laser firing shells either. This equivalent of a heavy laser cannon bolt may have been subtly guided by the Force, as Obi-Wan would just barely make it out alive. As soon as the Republic became the Empire, these walkers near instantly went from a symbol of proud fighters of democracy to symbols of oppression. Walkers all across the galaxy were moved to protect political centers, and used as an implied threat of force against the citizens. And when they deemed that the protest became a riot, those 6 anti-personnel cannons would open fire. Or like we see on Raxus Secundus, the Coruscant of the CIS had millions of citizens that were not instantly kneeling to their new emperor, including their leader.
I can no longer condone this unjust occupation.
As the people started to resist the clones, the ATTE stepped in to help squash any thoughts of rebellion, and noticed that all the Republic coloring is grayed out, both on the troopers and the vehicles. When Bad Batch rescued Senator Avi Singh, they had to get past Walker patrols, and as they escaped, they commandeer one, exploiting their intimate knowledge of this vehicle to take out the entire crew, Wrecker chucking them out of the forward side hatch. The Imperial clone gunners were able to load a heavy plasma charge and angle the gun to sink a shot that disabled the rear legs, forcing Bad Batch to jack another one, only for a third walker to land a second shot. With Tech's repairs, they are able to get the damaged walker operational, spewing thick black smoke and leaking oil as it dragged itself to a spot designated by the Senator. When the enemy walker caught up, a shot to the midsection scrapped it, but using the wreckage and a thermal charge, they were able to collapse their escape tunnel entrance and lose the Imperial clones. Some Imperial variants would open up the sides of the rear section, keeping a protective front, but then allowing the troops to open fire from this raised platform as they moved into the rebellious populations. While this made it able to engage threats on the side, of course this opened it up to grenades, while others had a flat top for moving large amounts of cargo. Over the following months, these engineering marvels were being scrapped, along with all the other remnants of the Clone Wars on the junk world Braca, sharing a mass grave with their enemy, as everything from Venators to Lucra Hulks ended up here. 15 years later, by 4BBY, Ahsoka wanted the Spectres to reach out to old allies hiding out on the planet Selos. And Kanan, an Order 66 survivor, is teleported back to his youth when he sees the allies' mobile home.
Now that is a work of art.
Looks like an old Republic tank, used during the Clone Wars.
When they approach, the man who saw clones kill his master is quick to ignite his blade, triggering Wolf to take some shots. But Rex gets Wolf and Gregor to calm down, while Ezra reminds Kanan that Ahsoka told them to trust these allies. When they get inside, we see that it looks like a mobile command variant of Walker, or perhaps a variant that had the top flattened for cargo, with the clones adding parts back like the main gun and other repairs. There are tons of accents to make it feel like home, from wind chimes to lights, and practical mods to make it a multi-story home with balcony handrails to dry your clothes and towels, and a flat seating area that doubles as a landing pad. Here the walker was used to hunt the massive Jupas, and either just due to age or the mods, it is pumping out black smoke with each shaky step. It looks like some legs were replaced, and the front step-down ladder on the canopy now works as a lookout spot for the hunts. They connect Zeb to an energy line that acts as a harpoon, and with some teamwork they do bring in the beast. But before the Spectres can leave with Rex's coordinates for potential rebel bases, the betrayal by Wolf brought the imps to this remote world. Wolf didn't want his brothers dragged into the rebel conspiracy, and got ahead of any accusations by contacting the nearest officials. Though he apologized and regretted it, the Empire was already on the way. The first TIE got shot down by a rocket launcher, and in the lull before the next wave, Rex gives the new generation a lesson on the mass driver cannon.
The Traverse controls are over here on the left, and the elevations on the right.
But it isn't long before they spot a trio of AATs closing in on them. Facing off against their Imperial replacements, Rex has to admit he is impressed with this new behemoth.
Reinforced armor plating, heavy cannons, and anti-personnel blasters.
Turning to race into the sandstorm, they are able to take advantage of the Jedi's powers to sense the enemy when all other sensor systems were down. By trusting the Force, Ezra puts a perfect shot into the AAT's weakness, the flexible neck. When they emerge from the sandstorm, the clones help the Spectres get off in their ship, but they know that the old heroes have no chance against the two walkers. While the clones were deciding to go out in a bang, full steam ahead, eating powerful bolts that drop it, only to rise up again, spewing smoke and slamming into the legs of the Goliath, while trying to fire at the second. But as you can see, the energy shots are harmlessly dispersing across the surface. And as the AT-AT seems immovable, the mass driver cannon loses power. Rex screams at the imps to come out and fight him, before accepting that he will be disintegrated by these turrets. He closes his eyes as the Spectres return to blast into the enemy, dropping down to hijack one and use it to open fire on the other, providing a shocking defeat for the Imperial forces that would lead to Vader's Inquisitors getting personally involved. In the views of some military strategists, the AT-AT overcorrected for the worry of mines. It wasn't as stable, but did hit the main objective of everything Imperial at this time. It struck fear into the population. You drop one of these down and it acted like an instant castle, towering over a city and able to rain death from above like some angry god. As the Rebel Alliance was formally organized, and the Galactic Civil War was raging on, this discarded masterpiece was being rebuilt by mechanics all across the stars, and pressed into the fight to restore the Republic. At least one fell into the hands of a Weequay gang, who placed it at the Sreeler spaceport to extort payments from visiting spacers, which resulted in it having its back legs blown off thanks to a concussion missile fired by Chewbacca. Months after the Battle of Endor, and 5 ABY, the New Republic was pitted against these during the Battle of Kuat Drive Yards. Perhaps the most logistically important battle of the entire war, the Imperial Remnant threw everything they had into the defense of the largest supplier of Republic and Imperial ships and vehicles. In the shipyards that made up the massive orbital ring, AT-ATs and AT-TEs crawled along the surface to try and shoot down NR forces. Though this final battle with the Walker was a loss, it would be forever loved and respected by factions all across the galaxy. That's it for the breakdown, and as for behind the scenes facts, one of the longest running standoffs on vehicle lore concerns that mass driver cannon. A lot of the early cross-section books were just worked on from images of ships and vehicles, without actually seeing them in action, and a lot of what happens on screen was for plot and cool special effect purposes, and the lore comes second. Movies and later shows were king, and though the Walker always looks like it's just firing a laser cannon, the whole idea of it being a mass driver firing a physical shell has never faded away. It was re-established in every Legends and even now the new canon books, though it's finally addressed on why it looks like a laser by vaguely saying that it could load shells that fired plasma bolts, which is what I meant by saying it kinda works like a magazine. Many of the same stop-motion animators for the AT-ATs in Empire Strike Back were brought in to work with the CGI team in Attack of the Clones, to try and capture the same feel of the movement. But there was also a deliberate choice to make them not seem invincible, like each side of the Clone Wars was devastatingly powerful, and it would not just be an easy win for the good guys, which is why we see them blown up so quickly upon their first deployment on Geonosis. In the Battlefront games, they act as mobile spawn points, and in Battlegrounds they can be built in mech factories. All the technical info comes from the Attack of the Clones visual dictionary, complete cross-sections, Imperial Handbook, Encyclopedia of Starfighters and Other Vehicles, and Rise of the Separatists. Please hit that like button, leave a comment, or share the video. These are the best ways to help me out. Subscribe to see more videos like this, check out the membership, or one of these videos that I'm sure you're gonna love. But most important of all, remember, no armor can stop plot-based projectiles, and the Force will be with you, always.
Concentrate fire on the center of the storm!
When all subtlety has gone out the window and you need to break through the heaviest defenses, look no further than the awe-inspiring power of the AT-AT. What's up, meta nerds? In this complete breakdown of the all-terrain armored transport, we'll be pulling from both Legends and canon sources, talking about its stats, capabilities, and role on the battlefield. Sit back, relax, and get ready for a tale that stretches all the way from Jabeam to Jakku. The all-terrain armored transport serves as the mainstay of Imperial assaults on the most heavily defended positions, towering over the battlefront and delivering lethal salvos of laser fire. This hulking walker stood at an intimidating 22.5 meters, essentially a reinforced troop compartment atop a quarter of powerful legs, with a head-like command module mounted on the front, bearing the walker's weaponry and sensor systems. It carried up to 40 troops, plus additional equipment on a 2-tiered transport deck, and was extremely well armored, impervious to all but the heaviest attacks. So let's look at every system, but like all good breakdowns, we'll start with the armament. The heaviest weaponry of the Walker is carried directly below the chin, coming in the form of 2 Taemin-Back MS-1 heavy laser cannons. These cannons were extremely powerful, capable of dealing with ground targets such as medium tanks and heavily protected bunkers with ease, and at a range of up to 17 kilometers. That's over 10 miles. These cannons were fire-linked, offering a pair of modes, both single and dual fire in conjunction, all with firing data from the cockpit. In some AT-ATs, these Taemin-Backs were switched with the MK3EW heavy laser cannons, which bore a no less destructive reputation. These were fixed, although the head could swivel on the move to engage targets in a deceptively broad 180-degree field of fire. The heavy cannons were augmented by a pair of FF4 medium repeating blaster cannons, positioned in a swivel mount on each cheek of the command module. These cannons, with their even broader field of fire and independent adjustability, could engage lighter ground vehicles, installations, and even airspeeders. Their built-in rangefinder afforded them independent accuracy against such secondary targets, picking off positions to clear the main cannons to engage the heaviest targets. In some AT-ATs, these FF4s were replaced by Mk2EW medium blaster cannons, and these variations seem to depend on the factory line from which they were produced. While the AT-AT could dish out considerable damage, it could also take return fire exceedingly well, being one of the most well-protected vehicles in the Empire's service. Dense 9095 T8511 grade Durasteel armor plated the entirety of this massive war machine, thick enough to be invulnerable to most weaponry. During the Battle of Hoth, Rebel forces turned P-Tower anti-vehicle emplacements against these walkers, and even though they could penetrate the armor of AT-STs and repulsor tanks, they had no effect on this walker's legs. 3 ATTE rounds at point-blank range likewise failed to even dent the heavy armor of this walker. In another impressive feat, a volley of 4 proton torpedoes from the Ghost failed to halt the advance of another AT-AT on Sphyrna. They were simply impervious to most weaponry, its armor harmlessly dissipating attacks, which was necessary to move them through heavily defended lines, breaching the enemy's perimeter and delivering their onboard infantry to their targets. Mines, likewise, were virtually useless, the heavy Durasteel footpads simply muffling the blasts, and the armored belly of the vehicle being too high to be impacted by such explosions, a notable design improvement from the ATT. Only concentrated heavy artillery or ground fire from tanks and heavy guns was capable of bringing down this walker in conventional combat. This durability was so considerable that perhaps its greatest attribute was its psychological effect, invoking terror and making the rebels feel impotent, with a single walker being able to snuff out the sparks of rebellion in cities all across the galaxy. Of course, this is also what made the Jedi invaluable to the Rebel Alliance. If you could get close in with a lightsaber, like Kanan Jarrus on Sphyrna or Luke Skywalker on Hoth, then any AT-AT will be in for a bad time. While the walker was durable and lethal, it was also very top-heavy, with its weight concentrated on the upper third of the AT-AT above its towering legs. To guarantee the stability of the walker as well as accuracy on the move, the gait of the AT-AT was carefully managed. Impulse terrain sensors on each footpad worked in conjunction with ground-penetrating radar scans in order to give the pilots in the cockpit an expert view of the terrain ahead. While moving, the pilots enjoyed a 3D understanding of the ground beyond the walker, including factors such as density and composition of the soil, rock, earth, or snow. This combination of excellent sensors allowed it to operate in a number of environments, including through water and amid deep snow, without concern for losing its footing from sudden pitfalls or unexpectedly loose rock or soil. It definitely lived up to the all-terrain reputation of their line, surprising opposing forces when moving through rugged ground, and giving Imperial commanders greater approach options. Of course, it should technically be called the most terrain's armored transport, as there were still certain environments that it was just unsuitable for, such as extremely steep hillsides, and even deep bogs and swamps could arrest the vehicle's motion, and certainly couldn't crawl up sheer cliff walls or hang upside down like its beloved Republic predecessor. But the walker's considerable height also proved an advantage in easily passing over trench lines, non-explosive anti-tank obstacles, and had the sheer power to just smash through buildings and anything built up to try and stop it. Enemy vehicles in defilade or behind cover that might not be seen with visual sensors could be detected by its other sensors like the radar, and the AT-AT drivers would be sure to rain down fire from above. But it wasn't exactly a stealth vehicle, as just the motion from the impact of the footpads would shake the ground with such force that it was noticeable kilometers away. But again, especially under the Tarkin Doctrine, this was seen as mostly a plus, just another way to strike terror in civilians and break the ranks of rebels, as the torturous booms slowly increased in strength, giving a young rebel plenty of time to go home and rethink his life. Armies could throw all their weaponry at the AT-AT battle line only to watch it be harmlessly absorbed. Combine that with the psychological terror, and you'll understand why the Battle of Hoth was such a moral victory for the Rebel Alliance, as it was the first major battle where these were taken down. Rex, Wolf, Gregor, and the Spectres did have some luck against these, but that was before the official start of the Galactic Civil War. It was on an obscure world, where the resistance and successful evacuation at Hoth would be a story told throughout the galaxy. The vehicle's weapons and motion was powered by a reactor system of 2 Kuat Drive Yard's FW-62 compact fusion drive systems. These drive systems, while powerful, could overload if breached and detonated. With this power, the heavy AT-AT could move at a considerable 60 km per hour, or 37 miles per hour, although that is on the best conditions on the most suitable terrain. 3 fuel slug tanks at the rear of the vehicle provided a continual power feed into the reactor. Being a solid form of fuel, think of the little pellets in a pellet grill, and this area was the most well protected, with extra plating of that special Durasteel armor to increase the walker's survivability. The head in which the command cabin was located contained the main crew, with a surprisingly low number of just 3 individuals. 2 pilots, specially trained and drawn from the grueling selection process of already proven veterans, who crewed the vehicle and fired its armaments. They were directed by a vehicle commander with access to a periscope and additional command and control communications. AT-AT crews developed a close connection with their vehicles and were encouraged to consider themselves as an extension of their vehicle and vice versa, often personally overseeing maintenance on these machines. AT-AT pilots wore helmets and suits which directly interfaced with the computers of the walker, like an augmented reality system, giving them a level of control like you might see in a fighter jet.
Uses 6 electro-optical sensors, giving the pilot an unprecedented 360 degrees of situational awareness. The pilot can actually look through the aircraft itself.
Those sensors giving them a simulated 360-degree field of vision, as well as the vehicle's vitals.
How's our hull looking? Badly damaged. We're at 70% integrity and falling.
Like electrical systems and fuel reserves. Wearing their full armor and helmet gave crews additional protection in the case of a breach, and did have some protection against radiation and fire. Unsurprisingly, AT-AT pilots considered themselves and their vehicles to be invulnerable, and gained a reputation for possibly well-deserved arrogance. 2 additional deck officers oversaw the troop compartment, allowing the piloting crew to focus on their primary duties. For all that firepower and capability, it was not a tank. Its primary purpose was to deliver infantry rather than slug it out with enemy vehicles. That was left for purpose-built Imperial walkers and repulsor craft. And its 40 troops were typically either stormtroopers or Imperial Army assault troopers, specially trained in deployment from this unique beast. A boom system could either drop the troops into combat directly from the belly, rolling out in several rapid waves, or the walker could kneel and the troops could disembark via a boarding ramp. In case of a breach, the onboard personnel could try and get out through a pair of escape hatches, one on each side of the compartment, to ensure that no matter which side the walker fell on, there was always a route to escape from the vehicle. Before deployment, troops were secured in 2 rows of seats, 2 on each deck, with a padded crash belt locking them into place, so injuries from impacts or a fall would be minimized. There's a clever design built into these benches that would wirelessly charge the packs and suits of storm and snowtroopers. A combat speeder bike garage at the AT-AT's rear held up to 5 speeders. These were typically deployed after the AT-AT had broken through enemy lines, released all its troops, and were now hunting down survivors. Once deployed via a harness system from the rear of the walker, the speeders would ferret out resistance, lay sensors or mines, and serve as scouts and pickets for the main assault force. The speeders were noted to well complement the plotting AT-ATs, screening and scouting for its parent vehicle, which could carry 2 disassembled AT-STs. And in addition to all that, the supplementary cargo capacity was measured at 1 ton, a little more than 1 dewback. The lumbering walkers required massive transports to bring them from their orbiting motherships down to the planetary battlefield. In most deployments, AT-ATs would be brought down singularly or in pairs aboard sizable Theta-class dropships. Although when deployed from the Dreadnought-sized vehicles, they could be brought down 4 at a time aboard Y-85 Titans. They could also be dropped directly into combat via Gazanti-class cruisers 2 at a time, going into action immediately and giving them a surprising degree of operational mobility, though they were typically deployed for ground assaults from orbit by large dropships. Walkers stationed within super-class warships, such as the Executor-class Star Dreadnought, were delivered to planetary surfaces within the previously mentioned Y-85. Smaller starships, such as the Imperial-class Star Destroyer, deployed single or paired walkers via the Theta-class, while other designs, including the Telgorn Corporation Warlord dropship, were capable of delivering an armored platoon of 4 walkers directly into battle zones as well. And sometimes they weren't even filled with troops. This whole space was filled with war materiel, meant to reinforce some outpost. When deployed, they would often be in staggered formation, providing overlapping fields of fire. As you see, you can get that arc way above 180 degrees, and the pilots would work in synchrony with each other to methodically destroy enemy emplacements, especially useful since the walker contained no aft-mounted weaponry. This is why we often see them flanked by AT-STs or repulsor tanks, being able to fall back and let their big brother take out any anti-tank weaponry the enemy might have, while keeping security and making sure the enemy didn't ambush them from the rear. Now, he mentioned it survived that attack from the Ghost, but with its enormous size, it was pretty hard to miss and vulnerable to all form of aerial attack. there are many times where this walker has a TIE fighter escort, just to make sure they weren't bombed out by some old refurbished Y-Wing. A properly coordinated AT-AT advance would be a frightening spectacle of combined arms. And while some rebel propaganda, especially after Hoth, like to portray this thing as a big lumbering dope, stupidly designed with a limited field of fire and easy to topple, they and the Empire knew that the truth was that when used correctly, this is one of the most effective pieces in the entire military. In fact, it's none of these supposedly obvious design flaws that are actually considered flaws by the engineers or the rebels, as they knew the real move was to sneak into this thing, taking advantage of its small crew, or be lucky enough to be able to get a shot onto its neck tube, which couldn't be rigidly covered in that plate armor since it had to be flexible to move side to side. And of course, the genius tactic of using tow cables mounted aboard converted T-47 airspeeders was a form of rebel guerrilla tactics that you just can't plan for. Turning to their history, they were deployed in their prototype stage as early as the Battle of Jabeam in the midst of the Clone Wars, where they proved their effectiveness by remaining mobile amid the planet's thick mud, while vaporizing separatist war machines such as the OG-9 homing spiders and hailfires with ease. These early models with their squared-off cargo compartments nonetheless fell to the wayside due more to the Republic's devastating defeat than their own performance. The innovative General Maximilian Veers championed the AT-AT concept and brought it into service as a mainstay of Imperial forces after the Battle of Yavin, where it became the war machine we all know and fear. They fought off a rebel incursion on Karaida itself, where its potential to be tripped and disabled first became known. Production was seen on many major Imperial factory worlds, such as Balmara and of course Kuat. In true Imperial fashion, they made sure to modify them to take over the galaxy, being viable on any terrain, with a wide variety of more esoteric variants, which is going to get its own video coming soon, as there are just so many variants to try and fit in here. Some of these that were after Endor came with mounted turbolasers, ion cannons, thicker plate armor, and even an aquatic swimmer version, so all that's going to be in the next breakdown. AT-AT saw use as late as 130 ABY in Legends by Darth Krayt's Galactic Empire, in both their standard version and AT-AHT upgrade, and as late as 34 ABY by the First Order in a modernized variant alongside the Titanic AT-M6. It's a truly iconic vehicle, doing everything from shooting a Force deity in the sky at the Battle of Atollon to serving as Rey's home as a rusted hulk in the deserts of Jakku. Now, they were of course not for private sale, but if you could get the right credentials and 150,000 credits, one of these devastating weapons of war could be yours. Just make sure you stock up on fuel pellets too. If an AT-AT existed in real life, it'd be about as tall as a semi-truck laid vertically, and as long as 2 school buses or 5 Volkswagen Beetles. They would tower over the Hollywood sign in Los Angeles, coming in at 1.5 times its height, while dwarfing everything else on the battlefront, being longer than 2 AATs or Rebel repulsor tanks, while being nearly as tall as 3 Hailfire droids or 2 of its predecessors, the AT-TE. If you didn't have a grapple hook, but you could clone Yoda, you'd have to balance 34 of them on top of each other to reach the top of the stooped cockpit. Although in the right art style, I'm sure he could topple one with the wave of his hand. Now for some cool facts and behind the scenes stuff. The actual size of the AT-AT has been a source of drama in the Star Wars community for as long as The Empire Strikes Back has been out. Radio dramatizations, source books, West End RPG guides, and independent articles have given a range of heights from 33 feet to 55 feet. Curtis Saxton, Lord of Star Wars Visual Dictionaries, has given the most popularly accepted answer of 22.5 meters, carefully measuring Luke's height compared to the AT-AT he destroyed with the handy combination of lightsaber and concussion grenade. George Lucas's inspiration for the AT-ATs were the towering Martian tripods from H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, while also specific design inspiration came from the giant maneuvering cranes that he would see in the port of Oakland, as well as a cancelled US Army prototype meant to be used in Vietnam. Just imagine that thing. And of course, there's tons of debate on how to pronounce it. You've heard me use both in this video, but I'm sure there'll be a war in the comments that'll make Palpatine proud over whether you say AT-AT or just AT-AT. Bring your best case argument down below. Its role in the battlefield is more akin to IFVs, infantry fighting vehicles, which are designed to drop off a load of infantry and support them while they advance towards the enemy. Unlike IFVs, of course, they can destroy the heaviest armor that comes to face them, so it's a mix of a main battle tank and IFV rolled into one. It seems that in every Star Wars video game, role-playing game, and book, someone just has to hijack an AT-AT to complete their objective. From Cal Kestis seizing one to help Saw Gerrera's partisans on Kashyyyk, to escorting a captured rebel AT-AT in Star Wars Battlefront 2. Iden Versio captures one in the game's main campaign, and during the liberation of Kashyyyk, a Wookiee named Karatha one-ups Chewbacca's AT-ST hijack, commandeering an entire AT-AT mid-battle. Just remember, if you intend to board an AT-AT, wait for the 40 troopers to deploy, and then just take out the dorks in AR helmets. That's it for the breakdown. Please hit that like button, it's the best way to help me out. Check out the links in the description, and most important of all, remember, the ground booming from the footsteps of an AT-AT means you do have some time to rethink your decision, but do it fast because they can shoot you from 10 miles away. And the Force will be with you. Always.
I want lightning up here now!
Here comes the cavalry. What's up, meta nerds? Today we're going to be taking a detailed look at the Republic's all-terrain recon transport, aka the AT-RT. We'll be pulling from both Legends and Canon to see how these versatile walkers were used to great effect by the clone army. Continued to see deployment into the Imperial Era and even beyond. The All-Terrain Reconnaissance Transport, Republic Scout Walker, or All-Terrain Recon Transport, known simply as the AT-RT, was the bipedal walker striding off the assembly line at Kuat Drive Yards, the main source of all the Republic's ground vehicles. Part of their lauded all-terrain line, the AT-RT is a single-man vehicle that cost anywhere between 8,000 and 20,000 credits, and stood a mere 3.4 meters in height. At only 1.5 Wookiees tall, it was one of the smallest walkers to ever stomp off a Kuat. But as a wise Muppet once said,
"Size matters not."
Because although it's not as imposing as the AT-TE or even the AT-AP, what it lacks in intimidation, it more than makes up for in speed and maneuverability. Able to reach top speeds of 75 kilometers per hour, or roughly 46 miles per hour, this thing can not just walk like its bigger brothers, but full-on sprint into combat, leaping over explosions, tough terrain, and even evading blaster bolts being fired from across the battlefront. Often deployed in packs, it's rare to see less than 4 per squad, and for major engagements, dozens could be bounding across the war-torn front to attack the enemy, like what we see on Umbara. This comparably small frame comes with more deployment options as well, with a single rider able to be dropped by an LAAT gunship without requiring a landing, and you can even march a pair of walkers across the battlefront in safety by packing them into the AT-TE until you felt safe enough to use these swift little recon walkers, unfolding similar to the B-1 out of an MTT, and jumping into combat like what we see on Ryloth. It's not all positives, however, with no shielding. You just get the metal armor plating protecting the pilot's lower half, the thin legs, a single but heavy repeating blaster cannon, and a very exposed driver, all meant the AT-RT couldn't be used by any shiny fresh off a Camino. So enter the Advanced Recon Force Trooper.
Did the kidnappers see you?
No, sir. We're the best scouts in the regiment.
Better known as the ARF Trooper, these clones were trained to make the best use out of these machines, minimizing its notable flaws by making use of numbers and speed, almost always with deadly results. Let's take a look at the tactics used during the liberation of Ryloth, and what made the boys in Lightning Squad so effective. Descending from an AT-TE by order of Jedi General Mace Windu, at least 5 scout walkers came barreling to the rescue after the droid army pinned down the clones' heavy walkers on this narrow path. Led by Windu and Commander Pons, the scout walkers used their incredible agility to close the gap between themselves and the enemy's several AATs in a remarkably quick time, dodging bolts and leaping clear over explosions. All the training the ARFs received on those augmented reality battlefronts in the bowels of Camino really paid off when a trooper was able to throw a thermal detonator right below the main barrel of the Separatist tank. After thinning the herd, the rest of the squads surrounding the remaining tanks were incredibly precise in their aim, targeting the tank's weakness and blasting them to scrap. We also see how accurate the main gun of the walker is, with Mace able to decapitate the droid commander. Although designed to take on infantry, the main gun of the AT-RT was an extreme threat to larger vehicles when multiple walkers could focus their fire. We see this strategy used again on Umbara to a similar effect, with dozens of speedy walkers being dropped into the battlefront amidst a rain of heavy artillery fire. Weaving through the bright green bolts on this darkened hellscape of a planet, the ARFs of Anakin's 501st found success getting to the Umbaran machines, once again overwhelming them with a barrage of cannon fire. These light walkers were also perfect for urban missions, as seen during the Battle of Kyros, with the 501st galloping into battle atop their walkers, blasting droids through the more settled villages once inhabited by the Togruta. Backing up the even faster BARC speeder bikes, the Recon walkers made short work of the droids along the way. The walkers were then used by Anakin and Ahsoka to quickly survey the surrounding area for bombs planted by slaver Darth Stennar. And it's in this search that we get a good look at the sensor system on the main viewing screen of the walker's console. This is a scout vehicle, first and foremost after all, so a state-of-the-art sensor system was a must. Thanks to the sprinting capability of these walkers, Anakin and Ahsoka were able to stop any more damage from being done by the Zygerian scum. Racing back to assist Obi-Wan, we get a great example of all the power in those legs. Anakin and his Padawan launch themselves into the air atop their walkers to get close to the escaping ship. This burst gave them enough distance to be able to summon the Force and finish off this maneuver and land on Dinar's ship, leading to some aggressive negotiations.
Where are they?
It should be noted how some squads customize their rides similar to their armor, with the 501st painting their mounts blue, bearing the name of their legion, and with Razor and Stack of Lightning Squadron painting theirs with Arabic letters B, E, and A. Despite all my digging, I couldn't find any specific meaning. We'll just have to email Filoni to get to the bottom of this. As the war raged on into its final months, we see the ARF trooper replaced by the less creatively named ATRT driver. It isn't made clear if these troops are a completely different branch of the GAR or simply the next evolution of the ARF. And this could be hinted at the design of Hound, an ARF trooper sergeant stationed on Coruscant, whose helmet bears more of a similar style to that of the ATRT driver, but that's purely speculation. These Scout Walkers were present on Kashyyyk when Order 66 came down, and despite the ordeal giving Commander Greed quite a headache, his men were seen using now Imperial ATRTs to hunt down Yoda, and would be immediately turned to enforce obedience from the Wookiee people, using the nimble walkers to quickly spread through the jungles and Wookiee cities, the first moves of what would turn this entire planet into a slave camp. Shown with their bright searchlight, and we even see how it works as a weapon rack for the driver's rifles, this squad came across a downed Wookiee flyer, immediately spreading out to pursue and capture any survivors. Even though the Empire was known to dismantle and quickly replace the Republic's war machines, it did hang on to the ATRT. Legends has it that a few of these walkers were used during Operation Nightfall, with some even being left behind to guard the ravaged temple in case of any Jedi return. The clones of Lightning Squad, now Stormtroopers, were also allowed to continue use of their walkers. Many were even used as policing vehicles, at least according to former Imperial, now Rebel, and totally not with a fake beard, Crix Madine. Eventually, the Empire did phase this nimble vehicle out of the frontline combat role, in favor of the ATDP and ATST. I suppose the smaller ATRT didn't quite fit into the Tarkin doctrine. Not scary and far too cheap and practical. Like with most vehicles, the Rebel Alliance is also said to have gotten their hands on a few, making some modifications to the weaponry, deciding to forego the repeating blaster for either a flamethrower or a Z6 rotary cannon, like the kind used by Heavy. These walkers proved popular, as some were even being used as late as 34 ABY by the First Order on Planet Vordan, which makes these little guys one of the longest living walkers in the galaxy. That covers the history of the ATRT, but let's dive into some behind the scenes facts. The ATRT was designed by concept artist TK Frame for Revenge of the Sith, but it first appeared in Clone Wars, the 2003 Cartoon Network show by Genndy Tartakovsky, specifically in Chapter 22. After Anakin and Obi-Wan lower the shields surrounding the Separatist compound, Commander Cody sends in dozens of ATRTs to provide backup to his infantry and air support. It's always interesting to see how many characters and vehicles so synonymous with Revenge of the Sith appeared first in this Clone Wars show. As the lead-in meant to hype the movie, it felt like a VIP sneak peek for us that saw it live. The ATRT appears in several video games, with perhaps its most notable appearance in both the classic and rebooted Battlefront 2, with it supporting a grenade launcher in the classic, though it was much slower than depicted now. It also appears in The Force Unleashed, but only the Nintendo DS version. According to the script for Revenge of the Sith, the ATRT was supposed to play a more significant role. Yoda would distract a group of now villainous clones, only for Chewie to pull the pilot from its saddle and take command of the walker, in a callback to Return of the Jedi. I'm always down for more Revenge of the Sith, but I think it's not a bad omission. The Tarzan scream from the Battle of Kashyyyk works better as a far more subtle homage to Chewbacca's AT-ST takeover. ATRT also has been a popular toy for both Hasbro and LEGO to produce over these years, with 10 separate models by LEGO since 2005, and Hasbro joining in on many releases in both the Clone Wars figure line and of course the basic figure line for Revenge of the Sith. The first release of the Recon Walker was even motorized, though maybe not hitting those 46-mile-an-hour top speeds. Even Hot Toys is getting in on the fun with the 501st variant of the Walker and ARF Trooper heading to market. Despite its limited screen time, the ATRT is proving to have a lasting impact on the Star Wars fandom. Let me know what you think of it down in the comments. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, share the video with someone who might like it, and subscribe to see more. But most important of all, remember, never look a gift walker in the canon, and the Force will be with you, always.
Units, over here!
What's up, men and nerds? This time we're going to be taking a look into another specialized member of Kuat's all-terrain lineup, the all-terrain pod walker. We'll go over its purpose, its use by the GAR, and how the maker himself brought this walker to life. But first, let's lift the metaphorical hood and see what made the AT-AP so unique. Standing at an impressive 11 meters or roughly 36 feet, the AT-AP would tower over the AT-TE, being over double its height and just under 6 Dexter Jetsters. In our world, this walker would be about the height of 2 male giraffes, and surely just as graceful. From turret to tail, this thing was 15.4 meters long, or over 50 feet, making it longer than a T-Rex, and just under the length of 3 Felucian Jellygrubs. Its impressive size didn't stop it from sprinting around the battlefront, with a top speed of 60 kilometers per hour, or about 37 miles per hour. While that might not seem fast, the top speed of an Abrams tank is 45 miles per hour, and that thing is on treads. The AT-AP is still faster than the Separatist favorite tank as well, the AAT, which only has a top speed of 34 miles per hour. We don't have a weight for this walker, but we do know that it had a cargo capacity of 200 kilograms, or about 441 pounds, which is just about 882 ears of corn, and only about a quarter dewback. A 2-day supply of rations was also on board, just in case the battle rages on longer than expected. With no shielding system, the AT-AP relied on its thick plate armor for any and all defensive needs. Now onto the main event of this beast, the 3 cannons. From top to bottom, we have a medium blaster cannon operated by an exposed gunner and a swivel turret, the powerful mass driver cannon, just like the one on the AT-TE, and finally a smaller heavy repeating laser cannon on the underside of the hull, which was meant for dealing with smaller threats. With all this firepower, you might think the role of this walker would be frontline armor, and we'll get into its role in a moment, but I really want to break down that big gun, the mass driver. Unlike other weapons in the Star Wars universe, the mass driver is essentially a slug thrower, firing a monstrously vicious Durasteel round that was moving at hypersonic speeds. The range was far, even further than the naked eye could see, which is why the AT-AP was equipped with a very impressive targeting system, as well as a sophisticated suite for data relay. This kind of power would require a lot of stability, and since the AT-AP was essentially just the forward section of an AT-TE, that meant it needed that big third leg in the middle of the body to provide a more stable firing platform, ensuring that mass driver hit its targets without the entire vehicle tipping backwards. It also had integral recoil compensation systems, as well as a top-of-the-line gyro stabilization system, ensuring this walker would remain standing. Because of this walker's deadly targeting capabilities and one-shot potential, the clones affectionately nicknamed the AT-AP the Sniper Tank. The ventral cannon was a repeating blaster, mainly used to fend off infantry, and the turret on the dorsal side of this thing was used against incoming enemy vehicles that came too close for the mass driver. All of this could be yours for the low price of 90,000 Republic credits, which means that you could have 3 of these walkers for just the price of 1 AT-TE, and even some spare credits left over for a few hundred cups of Jawa juice. Now that we know the in and outs of this walker, what exactly are we supposed to do with it? It was not intended to be a frontline assault craft, but instead to serve mainly as a highly mobile artillery unit. Now you might think the Grand Army of the Republic didn't need any more of that, since that role was nicely filled by the AB-7. However, if we look closer, the AT-AP solves a few of that cannon's issues. First, as a walker, it can maneuver through friendly and enemy shielding, something the AB-7 could not, being propelled via repulsor lifts. This made shoot and scoot tactics an even more viable strategy. The AB-7 had another glaring weakness: it did not have any means of self-defense should the enemy get too close. The AT-AP once again corrects this flaw, making it a more versatile vehicle to have in your armor lineup. And we're not alone in thinking that, as many clone commanders incorporated this tank into their legions, including the 41st Elite, the 327th Star Corps, and the 91st Mobile Recon Corps, which is just a few among many others. Co-op made this vehicle available well into the Clone Wars, perhaps seeing the same flaws we just mentioned in current Republic artillery, and the AT-AP quickly found its way into the Outer Rim sieges. Just as quickly, we see how the Jedi Generals misused this craft in their combat strategies. At least one was destroyed during the Battle of Horain, and their role as long-range artillery was seemingly completely ignored by the wisest Jedi of them all, Master Yoda. On the Wookiee homeworld of Kashyyyk, Masters Yoda, Luminara, Gree, and the 41st Elite were preparing for a massive droid assault on Kachiro Beach. And perhaps it was in their haste to unload the Venator that we see several AT-APs taking point alongside the infantry. Once the battle begins to rage, we still see these walkers charging into combat alongside the mighty turbo tanks. While the AT-AP could be used to support larger armor, it is strange to see it so front and center, especially as the swift Corporate Alliance tank droids are closing in over the water, and the droid gunships are swooping in through the flak-filled skies. Aside from this battle, we do see them in use in a more proper way. On Felucia, under the command of Master Aayla Secura and Clone Marshal Commander Bly, we see 2 AT-APs bringing up the rear in a column of armor. Supported by the heavy ATTE and the nimble swamp speeders, the ATAP looms over the less protected ATOT in a seemingly defensive position. This makes more sense than whatever was happening on Kashyyyk, and I'm sure this grouping of vehicles would have turned the opposing droids to scrap had the infamous Order 66 not been given out, and General Sakura shot in the back by her once loyal men. It's never confirmed when the Emperor ordered the production of these walkers to end, but we do know that sometime around the historic Battle of Yavin, the Alliance had gotten their hands on a few of these walkers, heavily modified them, and sent them out into war during the Battle of Tatooine, which ended in a rebel victory, proving that this old relic of the Clone Wars could still pack a punch. Legends say that some criminal organizations made great use of this old walker, with both the Hutt Cartel and Zan Consortium using the ATAP extensively to grow their underworld empires. By the time the First Order came into existence, the ATAP's legacy was still being felt, as the Urban Assault Triped Transport, or UATT, was inspired by that old design from Kuat. So with its history in the books, let's see what we can learn behind the scenes. George Lucas himself requested that the armor of the clone army be diversified for Revenge of the Sith, and so the ATAP was born. Initial concepts for this walker were done by author and artist Alex Yeager, who called it the Pod Attack Walker, or PAW for short. And much like the UTAT, the ATAP does not appear in any on-screen Star Wars media outside of Revenge of the Sith, its first and only appearance. As much as we love the ATTE, it would have been nice to see the full array of vehicles the Republic had represented in a show all about the Clone Wars. However, unlike the UTAT, this vehicle does pop up in a few comics and games, most notably Empire at War. Even in the base game, the ATAP is used by the criminal factions as their main source of armor. It also appears in LEGO Star Wars 3, The Clone Wars, as an air support option. And speaking of LEGO, the ATAP has been brought to us by the building company on 3 separate occasions, with their latest model arriving in 2019. Hasbro also got in on the action, giving kids and collectors a gorgeous model of the walker, and a few repaints in the years following. It's good to see that despite its minimal time on screen or pages, the ATAP has left its mark. This wraps things up on the All-Terrain Attack Pod. Please hit that like button, leave some comments, and subscribe. It's the best way to help me out. But most important of all, remember, not always the tactical genius Yoda was. And the Force will be with you. Always.
Concentrate all your fire on the nearest starship.
When you need the heaviest artillery on the battlefront, look no further than the SPHA. What's up, Meta Nerds? Today we'll be taking a look at the inventively named self-propelled heavy artillery, otherwise known as the SPHA. Using canon and legend sources, we'll do a deep dive into this massive artillery piece, learning its capabilities, stats, role, and all of its variants. The Grand Army of the Republic took to the field of battle with a wider range of weaponry at its disposal, suitable for all targets in any planetary battlefront imaginable. For the heaviest, most well-protected targets, the GAR fielded the Titanic SPHA line of artillery cannons. While each variant mounted a different weapon, all SPHA shared the same chassis, with a length of 140.2 meters and 20.6 meters in height. The bulk of the SPHA resembled a small building more than a combat vehicle. This size was necessary to contain the massive reactor which powered the weapon systems of the walker, while making sure that it was heavily armored, especially in the frontal quarter, as any damage from incoming fire could cause catastrophic meltdowns. They were staffed by a crew of 25. 10 of these being dedicated gunners, which were housed in the walker's command deck. This deck was lined with sensors and terminals to allow precise targeting and relaying of data to enemy positions. Each SPHA was a valuable system and a prime target for enemy commanders. Thus, some were armed with 12 anti-personnel blasters mounted around the perimeter of the vehicle, in addition to a security detail of 20 to 30 clone troopers, which would be carried on board as passengers, and which could disembark and spread out to engage threats. An array of 12 heavy dual-jointed legs, each larger than the legs of an ATTE, moved the gigantic vehicle at a surprisingly decent speed of 35 km per hour. And while it is technically a self-propelled walker, it's usually using those legs for a minor repositioning and to bring its armament to bear, with long-distance travel being done in the hold of Republic warships such as the Acclimator, which would typically carry 36 of these walkers. While being far too large to be carried by dropship, repositioning was not usually an issue, as the SPHA could probably measure range to target by zip code rather than meters, and they usually operated in teams of 4, receiving orders from the command bases such as the PX-4, which collated and prioritized calls for fire across the battlefront. These orders would then be relayed to the SPHA commander, which would go into action against the most protected and valuable targets that other weaponry couldn't touch. And they were only used against such important targets since they had a limited number of shots, after which they would be rotated to the rear and either act as mobile bases holding down already gained territory, or ideally being replaced by freshly charged SPHAs. And now looking to the variants, we'll start with the one we're most familiar with, the SPHA-T, T standing for Turbo Laser. 100 of these were deployed along with the rest of the clone army at the First Battle of Geonosis, proving devastatingly effective against Separatist core ships. Unlike most turbolaser cannons, the SPHA-T fired a solid beam of white-blue energy, which behaved more like a laser beam, though which would in fact be a steady stream of plasma. There is similar weaponry in the RX-200 and even the Death Star laser, in that the T's beam was composed of a number of sub-beams, which combined together through a curved emitter dish to form a single collimated beam. This massively powerful beam would lance directly into targets, but would require a clear line of sight. While this line of sight requirement theoretically made the vehicle susceptible to return fire, in practice they were situated far behind Republic lines to be out of range for most Separatist weaponry. The unwieldiness of this beam rendered it ineffective not only against aerial craft, but even most tanks and other ground vehicles. But it's not an issue if you use it for its designated role, engaging major targets and keeping them away from clone forces to batter down enemy installations during siege warfare. If Mace Windu's army on Dantooine had access to these things, they could have kept the seismic tanks of the droid forces at bay. During planetary sieges, SPHATs could wear down the shields of major cities, or even military bases. And while this may take months, in some locations this was the only option.
General Kenobi.
Commander Cody.
The siege goes well. With our continued barrage, their shields should be down in 3 months.
But we've been here a month already.
Yes, sir. We're right on schedule.
And while it's not limited by ammunition in the normal sense, it's not firing shells, the enormous amount of power it drew from the reactor meant that it had to be cycled and recharged in continuous combat. But if plugged into the systems of a Venator, for example, it could easily be fitted to use in an anti-capital ship role, something that Anakin Skywalker actually came up with, and what we see to great effect in the Battle of Coruscant. And when the Republic didn't have an orbital blockade, CIS warships could drop into high atmosphere and use their capital-grade weaponry to rain down destruction on Republic forces, an orbital bombardment. When they did this, SPHAT batteries were powerful enough to penetrate even capital ship-grade deflector shields, preventing SEP warships from having an easy go at Loyalist forces when they weren't present. It was much easier to leave a few of these behind than an entire fleet in orbit. And this is also what's happening during the First Battle of Geonosis, punching right through the core ship shielding and grounding them with concentrated fire, preventing them from escaping with their payloads of battle droids and more war machines. The SPHA-I, for ion cannon, traded the dorsally mounted turbolaser with a heavy ion cannon. And while it lacked the destructive power of its turbolaser cousin, it could more rapidly overwhelm a shield generator, not destroying any targets, but bringing down the enemy's defenses and paving the way for the SPHATs to be even more effective. And when paired with ground defense forces to be used against enemy warships, the ion cannon effect could be deadly, disabling thrusters and repulsors, causing the massive capital ships to free fall to the surface. It would have the same effect what we see with the core ships, in that case the repulsors were destroyed, but being ion disabled would have an equally catastrophic effect. The SPHA-V, V for anti-vehicle laser, took the mass and power out of the original and turned it against more mobile ground targets. And while no images of it exist, it is said to have the same chassis and specs as all the other variants, including the considerable crew and size. And it's likely that the main armament, the anti-vehicle laser, was located in a rotating mount to enable it to better engage vehicles in any direction. It had to move quicker and fire with more precision, and use far less energy in the beam, still being enough to destroy an AAT or spider droid. Hopefully one day we'll be able to see this beast sniping SEPI armor from across the battlefront with semi-rapid fire. The SPHA-C traded out the armament for a concussion missile launcher, which wouldn't have been something you see on a gunship, but at this size it would be a capital ship grade launcher. It has the same bulky chassis, but would not require the immense reactor used to power the laser. And so you can imagine all this space was used for an armored magazine to keep all those concussion missiles continually firing. And since concussion missiles come in sizes ranging from anti-vehicle to capital ship busters, the SPHA-C was likely very versatile and able to engage a range of targets depending on its ammunition load. This type of vehicle is very unique, being one of the only ground-based vehicles to be armed with concussion missiles in all of Star Wars. Continuing the trend of physical-based munitions, the self-propelled heavy artillery mass driver cannon mounted, well, you guessed it, the same thing we see on top of the ATT. The SPHA M cannon propelled a physical shell at incredible speed, usually enveloping the round in energy to increase its speed and penetration, so a coat of plasma over a real artillery shell. If this was scaled up, being on a longer rail system afforded by the vehicle's massive barrel, the range of this artillery piece would be unmatched by anything else out there. This class of mass driver could penetrate directly through most deflector shields, though ray shield and concussion shields would usually have sufficient power to stop such projectiles. The ray shields strong enough to do this, however, were typically mounted only on the most important installations and large warships, leaving most, even shielded targets at the mercy of the SPHA-M. It's possible these were deployed during the Battle of Munilist, with their parabolic rounds curving down into their targets, unlike the plasma beam or laser weaponry. But since this variant moved around via repulsors rather than feet, we're back to the issue of finding space for a large reactor, for the power-hungry systems that are repulsors at this scale. All of these SPHA variants served the Grand Army of the Republic as effective super heavy artillery, and these vehicles were even known to temporarily continue into Imperial service during the early years of the regime. While the line would largely be replaced by more effective and mobile laser artillery such as the SPMA, one last variant was designed specifically for use in the Imperial Army, the self-propelled heavy artillery thermobaric launcher, or SPHAF, adding a special war crime capability of the kind sought after by the New Order. The F essentially stands for fire, as upon impact these shells would release a fast-acting chemical catalyst that would ignite the atmosphere on standard Type 1 worlds, starting a self-sustaining chain reaction that would create an apocalyptic firestorm. Like the defoliator prototype employed by the CIS during the Clone Wars, these shells were launched in a high arc to come down on top of targets, including those behind cover. Any organic soldiers or plant matter would be incinerated in a brief but intense firestorm, and those even close to the blast radius or inside of cover would likely still suffer horrific burns. The impact was considered so terrible that Leia Organa compared its effects to the Death Star 1, just in terms of how reprehensible it was. And while the rebels were happy to protest its use, I'm sure in the back of Rex's head, he knew the 501st would have loved to have had a few SPHA-Fs in their arsenal at Umbara. Apparently, cooking enemy troops and civilians alive was a bit too much even for the Empire, and their use is hardly mentioned. It is unknown when they were retired or how extensive their use was. Their ability to sear down vegetation to expose partisans could be considered even more useful than their direct impact. But since it was so gigantic and hard to deploy, it would kill everyone in the blast radius in a way that was terrible for PR. There's not many instances where this could be used, as really you would only use this thing on a remote, hidden jungle base. And so it is dark to think that the main rebel base on Yavin would have been a prime candidate for this kind of fate. If the SPHA was ever dropped down here on Earth, it would be almost as long as the wingspan of two 747 passenger airliners, or 1.5 football fields. This colossal walker dwarfed everything else on the battlefront, being longer than 15 SEPI AATs, or even 7 Imperial AT-ATs, while being about the height of 2 MTTs stacked on top of each other. So it's a good thing the SPHA was well armored, because it was sure hard to miss. So that's it for the breakdown. As for the cool facts and behind the scenes stuff, early concepts for Attack of the Clones had the SPHAT moving via a system of massive treads, but this was changed by George Lucas to a leg system to match its AT-TE cousins. Like many Star Wars vehicles, its size seen on screen doesn't quite match the size in the databank, seeming to be more around 60 meters in length. And these things are similar to supermassive artillery guns from real history, such as the Gustav and Paris guns, which could shell their targets with multi-ton rounds from dozens of miles away. Like in Star Wars, these giant artillery cannons fell out of service in favor of smaller, higher precision artillery pieces that didn't take months to assemble. So that's it for the breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, share the video, leave a comment, and subscribe. And check out one of these videos, I'm sure you'll like them. But most important of all, remember, there's no Geneva Convention in the galaxy far, far away, and the Force will be with you. Always. When SEPI tanks are closing in on your position, you're gonna call for armor support, but when they aren't available, you're gonna rely on the dependable AV-7. What's up, Meta Nerds? Today we're doing a deep dive into the Republic AV-7 anti-vehicle cannon, using both legends and canon sources to construct a full picture of this vehicle, its stats, capabilities, and role in the Grand Army of the Republic. The AV-7 serves the dual role of anti-vehicle cannon and medium artillery piece for the Grand Army of the Republic. We'll discuss both of these roles, and how the AV-7 serves them on the battlefronts of the Clone Wars, as well as the technical specifications, real-world comparisons, and behind-the-scenes facts. First, and most importantly, what's in the name? The AV-7's primary task is destruction of enemy vehicles. The cannon itself is served by one gunner seated in an open mount, with a selection of screens in front of him displaying targeting data likely fed from the forward spotters or orbital reconnaissance. Depending on range to target, the cannon will elevate or depress, aided by the four-leg assembly the cannon is mounted on, which can flex to allow additional range of motion for targeting. The legs also serve as shock absorbers, reducing the cannon's recoil as it fires. It is firing plasma energy shells, capable of destroying AATs and snail tanks with a single direct hit. The AV-7's shells fall on the target in a shallow arc rather than drilling into them from the front, resulting in hits impacting the weaker topside and/or the rear armor of enemy armored assets, resulting in almost guaranteed kills. They can crank down for direct fire as well, creating enough blast and overpressure to wipe out friendly and enemy infantry alike with impunity, as Captain Rex noted during the Battle of Christophsis. The AV-7s also fulfill the role of medium artillery, providing indirect fire support to GIR forces at moderate range. On the battlefield, SPHATs and AV-7s would likely work together, with SPHATs firing at extreme long range at major enemy targets, while AV-7s could focus on tactical fire support against enemy infantry and armor. Their plasma shells were more than capable of shattering closely packed Separatist droid columns, and the overpressure from the blast could kill or injure organics as well, even when not in the direct blast radius. While the ammunition fired by the AV-7s was plasma and not kinetic, they could nevertheless be programmed to detonate at selective heights, such as at head level to inflict maximum casualties against infantry.
Rex calculated a final firing solution that would cause maximum destruction of the armored column and droids. If they placed a few rounds just so, set them to cook off at chest height rather than on impact, the explosion would flatten anything standing, and the shrapnel from the droids would kill any organics standing in the blast radius.
AV-7s were seen throughout the Clone Wars, from the Battle of Christophsis to the Second Battle of Geonosis. And while the plasma shells were devastating against unshielded targets, they had difficulty penetrating enemy shields, both vehicle-based and larger theater deflector shields. The deployment of a theater ray shield by Confederate General Worm Loathsome completely nullified the firepower of a quartet of these guns. While during the siege of Poggle the Lesser's factory, the AV-7s were unable to penetrate the shielding of the newly deployed Separatist super tanks. Here we see a major weakness in the AV-7s as well. Despite their tremendous firepower, they are incredibly vulnerable to all manner of enemy return fire. Rockets, tank shells, and even infantry blasters pose a threat to this cannon, as it is an unarmored vehicle with an exposed gunner. In the anti-tank role, the AV-7 is depending on its range, hoping to neutralize the target before it can return enemy fire. In this way, the AV-7 is depending on range, concealment, and firepower for survival, similar to the World War II era anti-tank guns such as the PaK-40. In the counter-battery role, the AV-7's open design makes it more vulnerable to CIS armored artillery, such as the HAG-M. Thus, it is best employed in entrenched positions to lessen the effect of incoming enemy fire, using the firing arc so that it can stay behind cover and only have to worry about enemy air or artillery. But the final advantage possessed by the AV-7 is its mobility. Despite its appearance, it does not rely on its legs as its primary means of locomotion, like say its counterpart, the J-1 proton cannon. Instead, its legs fold under the chassis and the AV-7 moves via a built-in repulsor lift. This puts the AV-7 in a class of self-propelled artillery, able to move with Republic armored columns and deploy as needed rather than relying on space or aerial transport for redeployment. The repulsor lift would enable the AV-7 to employ shoot-and-scoot tactics in counter-battery operations, firing salvos at enemy artillery positions, then quickly redeploying before enemy rangefinders can triangulate their position and return fire. The AV-7 was also mounted on rail assemblies as part of some Venator-class Star Destroyers, being the secondary armament along its port and starboard trenches, between the brim and hull decks. These cannons lack legs and instead are built into rolling rails to aid in absorption of recoil. This was likely an improvised measure, as these weapons were not a part of the Venator's standard armament, and may have been a late war practice on an informal basis, such as the addition of SPHATs to bolster a Venator's ventral armament in the Open Circle fleet. Now for some stats and comparisons of the AV-7. It was manufactured by the firm Tame & Back, responsible for all manner of turbo-laser weaponry, costing the Republic 14,000 credits apiece brand new. However, by the time these weapons left the GAR service, they could be picked up second-hand for as little as 8,000 credits. So that's a lot of firepower for planetary security forces, rebels, and whoever else could get their hands on these guns, as they were phased out of the Empire in favor of more modern and effective artillery designs. such as the M102 Fire Arc, SPMA, and the V1A8 Penetrator. Though the main cost of this thing is going to be in the shells, but since they are plasma, perhaps it is running off of common Tabana gas. It might be one of the cheapest bang for your bucks out there in the galaxy. Including the cannon, the AV-7 was a hair over 15 meters in length, which means if it was brought to Earth, it would stand the same length as a standard US semi-trailer. While no stats exist for its width, approximating by the size of the cannon barrel and gunner, the AV-7 is about 9 meters in width, or 4 golf carts end to end. Sadly, we get no weight approximation for the AV-7, making it difficult to determine how powerful its built-in repulsor is. And now for some cool facts and behind-the-scenes stuff. In the last video on the AT-RT Frogwalker, I forgot to mention that the main advantage of walkers is that they can walk through shields. All repulsor lift technology, which makes everything hover in the Star Wars universe, repels against all forms of energy shields, like the same poles of a magnet. But if this cannon could not walk on those feet, instead using the repulsor tech, then it wouldn't have been able to go in and out of shielding. Which isn't that much of a deal breaker for artillery. It's not supposed to be scrambling all across the battlefront, but it may have limited the scoot and shoot tactics, meaning you couldn't have your shields up, move out of it to fire, and then move back in, like you could if you were using the ATTE in a kind of artillery role. The AV-7 has popped up in several modes and games throughout the years. The 2011 Hasbro model comes with a tread-based propulsion system, a decidedly non-canon, if interesting variant. Just look at the silly little treads on the feet. But if you want to use the AV-7s in action yourself, you can try out a number of Empire at War mods, such as the Fall of the Republic or Republic at War. As mentioned before, the AV-7's design and operations mimic that of World War II era anti-tank guns, such as the PaK-40, Soviet 45 and 57mm, and US M1 anti-tank gun. Like the AV-7, these guns were much simpler to produce than entire tanks, but provide similar firepower at the expense of crew protection and maneuverability. So that's it for the breakdown. If you made it this far, please hit that like button, comment your thoughts on this or suggestions, subscribe to see more, but most important of all, remember, beware the overpressure, and the Force will be with you, always.